You're tuned in to Women in America, the podcast that dives deep into the issues shaping gender equality in the U.S. and beyond. Hosted by Pari and Eve, public health professionals by day, content creators by passion, we bring you expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable strategies to push the fight for equality forward. They say there's no national abortion ban yet. But make no mistake, the Republican strategy is clear. Chip away at access state by state, policy by policy, until abortion is functionally banned nationwide. In this episode, we expose the gradual but deliberate plan to roll back women's rights, from federal court stacking to targeted restrictions that seem minor but add up to devastating consequences. We'll break down how these tactics are already shaping the future of abortion access and what we can do to fight back before it's too late.
Today we are reflecting on all the work that we have done and has happened in the world of reproductive health in 2024 and looking ahead and what we know is coming under the next administration. And Eve, I know that you closed out the year by attending the White House holiday party, and you mentioned that that was bittersweet, and I can imagine why, but what was that like for you?
It was such an honor to go, especially after, you and I had done so much work on the Harris campaign, and obviously it would have been a better scenario had we be going into another similar administration, but alas, such is not the case. So it was such a great reunion for all the creators that were together in like the joyous moment that was the DNC, and to be in such a, beautifully decorated historic building like the White House, and to all be in community one last time before
One
the
last
yeah,
time.
before the reins got turned over. It was a lot of fun, but we were also standing in there wondering if any of us would ever see the inside of a White House again.
Yeah, like I said, bittersweet.
Yeah. At least not for the next 4 years, which is fine. But I hope that one day we'll be invited again.
Yeah, I mean, you want to like from a logical perspective be like, maybe there are some folks in the new administration who will actually try and listen to subject matter experts. And then you see what happens every day and you're like, never
No,
mind.
I mean, I've already written off that it won't happen in the next 4 years. I'm just hoping that there's another election 4 years from now where
Yeah,
it could possibly turn over again. That's where my head's at. Not to
super
start
fair.
us off from a very dark space or anything.
I mean, honestly, every day in America is a dark space, so it's really okay. But like, I know we're joking about whether or not there'll be another election, but frankly, like during the campaign, there
Mhm.
were a lot of lies and really intense false promises, and also some
Mhm.
like really insane things that were said by candidates who are president. So when we are looking ahead at like how do we best prepare for what's coming, I often think about like, okay, what they actually, all of the stuff they said, and then what they've actually laid out in terms
Yeah.
of what's happening.
Yeah, there was so much said during the campaign that was misinformation, or that were just like horrendous things to promise, like a national abortion ban, right? So he said he was going to pass a national abortion ban, which is extremely unpopular because we know that the majority of Americans side with full access to abortion, if not partial access with exceptions
Yeah.
at bare minimum. And then he backtracked on that anyway. And then he stated again that he was going to do it. So now, with all of his wavering, they are actually trying a new strategy where, because they understand that abortion bans are extremely unpopular, they've introduced this term of national minimum standards, because now Americans hear a ban and they're like, whoa, 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 that's too much. We don't want that. But before they even get to introducing national standards, they have a multi-prong approach to get at banning abortion without actually banning it. And that includes things like, we should talk about the Comstock Act. It includes fetal personhood laws, which we should talk about. And it includes applying anti-vax strategies to the anti-abortion movement.
Yeah, maybe we start with that last one.
Great, please.
Yeah, so RFK Jr. is currently trying to get rid of FDA approval for the polio vaccine because why wouldn't we all want to be on an iron lung again, right? When we
Also, the
had a middle.
same man that's contributed to a massive measles outbreak in 2019 in Samoa
Yeah,
is now like, oh, we should take
and
away
killed
vaccines.
almost 100 people
Yeah.
because of that. Yeah, so he is our leading expert somehow on this. They are setting up a precedent to challenge FDA approval for abortion pills in the
Mm-hmm.
same way that they're doing for the polio vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be obviously a huge blow to access for everybody because now the anti abortion movement will be able to claim that abortion is dangerous, even though that's literally never been true.
They're
So,
degrading people's trust in science, and they have been for years. So they're doing it big time with the vaccines in general, because then if you degrade trust in vaccines, it's not that hard of a jump to be like, well, if we already made the FDA repeal this vaccine for it not actually being safe, then the same case could be made for abortion pills.
yeah, it's fully intentional, like you said. Even this vilification that they were doing during the campaign of like experts, being like, we
Mhm.
don't need to listen to experts. He comes up with these words that his side uses. They're making fun of experts now by calling them credentialists, as if that's a bad thing. It's like, yeah, I do have credentials. I worked hard for them and I'm proud of them. Like, it's just thank you. But yeah, no, that's absolutely what they're going to do. They're going to approach this through an anti-vax methodology, which they're normalizing now, right, for half
Mhm.
of America. And then once the FDA approval is gone, they're going to move to that second prong, which is like, okay, even if people are choosing to take this pill without FDA approval, we're going to make sure that it's just not available
Mhm.
by using the Comstock Act.
Mhm.
And I don't know if people are familiar with how ridiculous the Comstock Act is,
Wait,
but
before we go into the Comstock Act, do we need to change our title from Party Eve MPH to Party Eve Credentialist?
credentialists. We just buy into
Wait,
their.
that would be hilarious. I think I'm gonna change it on our account today.
We got to take ownership back of all the bullshit that they're saying.
hmm
The Comstock Act is from 1873,
What?
and
How many years ago was that?
too
More than
many.
100, like almost 150.
Yeah, and
150
they,
years ago. Wait. What else was happening 150 years ago? Women didn't have the right to vote.
yeah, I mean, half the states weren't even states.
hmm We didn't have 50 states. Women were wearing jump skirts and petticoats.
Yeah.
I just gotta lay out the scene for what was happening during the
Well, the
Comstock
thing is, like,
Act.
the sad part is that I was about to be like, women didn't have healthcare access, and I'm like, we still don't. Like, damn it. Yeah. But this 1873 Comstock Act has been in the news for the last like year and a half because it was the basis for that whole IVF conversation that started in Alabama.
Ooh, that was a
And
doozy.
yeah, and if people recall, what was happening then was that they were like using this 150-year-old law when Alabama wasn't even a state to now justify policies in 2024.
hmm
And they're now trying to apply that nationally because basically in 1873, this dude, Anthony Comstock, is always a
Anthony.
fucking dude.
Tony.
Um, he decided that he refused to let lewd things be mailed by the United States Postal Service.
And how did he define lewd?
I don't even know if they did, frankly. And
Yeah.
maybe that is kind of what is causing our problem because now Republicans are using that same stupid 150-year-old law to say that abortion pills cannot be mailed or
Mhm.
distributed via mail across the country. Which, I mean, if you want to talk about lewd things in the mail, like half of Amazon's deliveries would have to stop. Like, let's be real, right?
So
But
they're
just
gonna ban medication abortion mailing, but still allow sex toys,
well,
Viagra?
in classic GOP fashion,
Yeah.
they are choosing not to actually define anything, right? They always do this. They write bills and laws and then leave all of the implications that those laws create up to chance. And when it comes to women's lives, they're totally fine doing that because they don't give a fuck and they've never
Well,
given a
they
fuck.
want to be able to interpret it broadly to ban whatever they want.
Yeah, and also, Eve, how dare you come for Viagra? That is not included in this situation.
Or Cialis. I
Yeah,
just heard an ad for that on the radio today. I'm like, could you imagine if are we even allowed to do radio ads on abortion pills? I've
I don't
never heard one.
I don't know. I know that the first ever Times Square ad for abortion was in 2024, ever.
Yeah.
And there were lots of companies that had tried before to promote pro-choice messaging, and whoever the Times Square people are had said no. And the first one ever was this year.
That's actually funny. I just remember this ad because it caught me so off guard while I was driving in the car today. I mean, I've heard them before. I think we all have, but I don't know, in this current landscape, I was like, "What? We're still doing PSAs on this on the radio?" This
Yeah.
guy came on and was like, "Men, do you need to improve your sex life? You can see results right in the office from Viagra, Cialis, and here's a medical professional." And then they had like a quote unquote doctor speak. And it's like, who is this doctor who's talking about if you take the little blue pill? And then in general, I just went off on a mind tangent about like, we should be having less sex. Not that there's anything wrong with sex. There's just too much sex for the limited amount of birth control and abortion that's available for people to still be maintaining their own family planning goals.
Well, it's interesting you say that because if this Comstock Act is actually implemented, it's
Hmm.
about to get so much worse, right?
Hmm.
Because, like, regardless of where you live, like, even if your state is pro choice and progressive, because you cannot receive abortion pills via mail, the access to first trimester abortions, medication abortions, is going to be impossible. It just won't happen. And that obviously also affects like all telehealth access that would have
Hmm.
previously existed for medication abortion is now completely moot. Or as
Yeah.
Joey from Friends say, it's moo. But yeah, it's just
And even without that, they're already trying to tear down pieces of mail order abortion because the Comstock Act is not even being enforced right now.
right.
But you heard of the case out of New York between New York and Texas, where there was a Texas woman who got abortion pills from a provider in New York, where it's a haven state for abortion rights. It's protected. The doctor was within her legal prescribing responsibilities to give this patient in Texas abortion pills. And Texas is suing the doctor for $100,000 for violating Texas law.
Yeah, and across state lines. And
Yeah.
that's the first case of its kind, and it remains to be seen what the verdict is. But if the decision does go the anti-abortion way, it would it would open doors to like limit medication abortion access nationally, right?
Yeah. You know what's
And,
crazy about that case, though? If I was to ask you who is the victim in that case, when both the provider provided a service that's within her occupational responsibility
Mhm.
and the patient received a service that she wanted, the victim was the state of Texas? Question mark?
Well,
Like nobody
that
is
is
actually suffering from this. It's a made up
this
case.
the state of Texas disagrees with you.
Their
Like
life is
I
so
have
hard.
They're like, I have been personally victimized by this woman that I have absolutely zero relation to getting care in a legal fashion in a
Right.
place where she is totally capable of doing that. Yeah.
Which
I'm
is funny
surprised.
because that's how the whole Supreme Court ruling went on the last FDA case that they heard, right? Like the doctors brought this case that were like, we don't agree with being forced to provide abortion. And the court was like, you are not personally hurt by this.
Yeah. And they were like, blasphemy.
Yeah.
I swear if Texas had their way, they would probably try and hit the entire state of New York with a terrorism charge at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
would just be really ironic. But the important piece of this is that case that you just brought up. It almost goes hand in hand with this Comstock Act usage, right? Because what they're doing is they are limiting the distribution of
Mm-hmm.
what is currently approved, safe, legal medication. And the majority of abortions that take place in the United States are happening within the first 3 months of a pregnancy,
Mm-hmm.
which is a medication abortion.
Mm-hmm.
So not only are you now saying that people are not going to have access to this, but you're also taking away what is medically agreed upon as one of the safest procedures in
Hmm.
medicine, way
Hmm.
safer than childbirth.
Hmm.
So that is definitely one of the strategies they're going to use. And frankly, it will effectively rid access to over 80% of current procedures. So you can call a national ban, but there are so many things that are about to happen that are simply a national ban by another name. And this
Hmm.
is one of them.
Hmm. Rid 80% of procedures. That's a lot of unplanned births
I mean,
going into a foster care system that cannot handle it already.
99% of all abortions in the United States happen within the first 5 months.
Hmm.
And people don't seem to comprehend that. So abortions that are taking place within the first 3 months are purely medication abortions.
Hmm.
You take two pills, it's safe, you can do it at home, you don't even have to be in the physical presence of a provider. And that's how it's been happening for
Hmm.
decades and decades and decades. And
Hmm.
now they're attacking that. And unfortunately, they're not stopping there. Like you said, there's other prongs.
Hmm.
We're seeing that happen right now
Hmm.
in Idaho and South Carolina with this
Oh,
concept of like
yeah.
giving an embryo personhood.
And in Idaho, where they've made up this term abortion trafficking,
Yeah, they are one.
really something else. Because you did a role play post not too long ago where you were trying to leave Texas and a cop pulled you over and they were like, we're going to have to give you a pregnancy test before you can cross the border to wherever you're going in that imaginary situation. And everyone in the comments was like, they can't control where you go. This is such a dramatization. This is never going to happen. Idaho literally just made it illegal for you to travel across state borders to get an abortion if you're a minor, but still, it's controlling people's bodily movements.
Yeah, I mean, they started with the minors because again, in classic marketing fashion, they're like, "Oh, if we can do something with the minors, people will get all riled up about it."
Hmm.
But it sets a legal precedent and they're going to expand that to everybody,
Hmm.
right? And even when I did that role play, it was already legal in certain counties in Texas. And that's what
Hmm.
people don't understand. Like, it wasn't a state law yet. But that same day, the reason I did the role play was because the Senate Democrats had proposed a bill that would protect pregnant people's right to travel across state lines. And Senate Republicans were like, no,
Hmm.
we don't want to sign that. And
Hmm.
they used the whole excuse being like, oh, it's unnecessary because like this will never go down. And it's like, bitches, we know exactly what you're trying to do, and you did it.
Yeah.
So they killed that bill because they knew that they were going to be trying and putting into place these like trafficking laws, which they just did in Idaho.
Hmm.
And South Carolina has now proposed a bill, an insane, truly objectively insane bill where they're trying to legalize the death penalty for women who get abortions.
Because they're so pro-life.
Absolutely. I mean, just the
What is
most
more
pro-life.
pro-life than calling for the death penalty?
Right. And then, as if they're not egregious enough, we're just like, they literally told themselves to hold their own beers and then added in a second provision to the bill where they were like, also, an embryo is a person from the second it's fertilized. Like the moment of
Damn.
fertilization, it's the person, which anyone with even a single shred of common sense knows has 1,000 implications. But the reason why that bill is critical to this like whole fight that you and I are talking about right now is because it opens the door for them to label contraception, which, prevents
Hmm.
fertilization,
Hmm.
aka prevents a person from existing, according to them. It allows them to label contraceptives as homicide,
Mm.
which in South Carolina is a penalty that is eligible for capital punishment. So
Hmm.
basically, if you are charged with homicide, you are now eligible for the death penalty. So they're simultaneously trying to label abortion homicide, and then they're also labeling an embryo or person the second an egg is fertilized, which means that now, if you use contraception, you are preventing the existence of a person, which is also homicide.
What is
It's
so crazy about this is what is the best way to prevent abortion if you don't approve of abortion?
birth control.
Right.
Sex education,
So that
reproductive rights.
just like further confirms what you and I are always saying about how it's not about protecting life. It's just
No,
about controlling women because they don't put anything in place to be able to prevent abortion.
truly, there is not a single country in the world,
Hmm.
not a single situation globally where the criminalization of abortion has ever led to the decrease of abortion.
Hmm.
The only thing it has done is led to the decrease of safe abortion,
Right.
which means that every time abortion has been criminalized or even just like delegalized in some fashion,
Hmm.
the maternal mortality has increased.
We've seen that in the US, even just since Roe was overturned, that abortions
Absolutely.
did not decrease, they increased.
Yeah. In fact, in Texas alone, just Texas, we saw an increase of over 40% in maternal deaths as a result of unsafe abortion or lack of access to abortion.
Because abortion increased and women were getting them anyway through unsafe means.
Because, like, and nobody talks about this because they don't want to highlight the fact that that's what happens,
Hmm.
right? So instead, when that data started to come out, that was when they were like, oh shit. And then they got rid of their maternal
Yeah,
mortality
they're
rates.
like, actually, we don't want to count this anymore because if we
Yeah.
don't count it, then it didn't happen, right?
Which I know you didn't mention as one of the prongs, but honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, is totally part of that, right?
That is
Like
a
they're
prong.
also, it's like super intentional, like just ignorance of the issue and making sure that the data does not exist. And also firing the people who were previously working on that kind of data so
Hmm.
that they don't have access to those roles or positions anymore.
Isn't it kind of ironic that they're like, we need to dismantle trust in science and data, but then they also kind of acknowledge that they believe in science and data because they realize that it's so powerful, they need to block the public from seeing it?
Okay, well, Eve, let me tell you something about Republicans. They are
Here we go.
hypocritical and evil, like over and over and over again. No, I'm serious. I don't think the people who are running our country are stupid. I
Yeah.
think they're actually very calculating,
Yeah.
right? And they know exactly what it takes to get the average American, their average American, to vote for
Hmm.
them. And
Hmm.
so that's what they do. You and I see this in our comments all the time. I will present a story, for example, the South Carolina thing that I just talked about.
Hmm.
I did a post on it, right?
Hmm.
And it gained quite a lot of traction. And all of these anti choice people are in these comments acknowledging how horrible this is. They're
Hmm.
just like, this is not happening. And I'm like, okay, first of all, Google is fucking free. It
Yeah.
has been the whole time. It takes literally less than 20 seconds for you to verify what I'm saying. But the irony is that you are denying this because you know that it's a bad thing.
Kari, I don't think they use Google. They use Fox News and Newsmax websites as Google.
I
And you
know,
know it's not going to be on there.
but here's the thing: Fox actually reported on South
Oh, they
Carolina.
did.
Yeah, I mean, they ultimately, after days and days and days, they were like, "Oh shit, we should probably put out a headline."
In what
So they did.
light? How did they report on it?
I mean, they didn't say it with the lens that you and I
They were
talked
like,
about.
women will be punished, dot, 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 with no mention to capital punishment.
Yeah.
They were
Also,
just like, bad
you
things
know
might
what?
happen to them.
I just want to point out is that we started this episode by talking about like all of the false promises and all the nonsense that was said in the last
Hmm.
several years leading up to the election, right? And one of the things that Republicans love to say is like, women will not be punished. The women can continue to access care. We will go after the providers. And it's like, okay, tell me how in South Carolina that's not the case. Like the women are being punished. And then you have Donald Trump, who literally at 1 p.m. on one day will be like, the women will not be held accountable. And then at 3 p.m., he's like, the women should receive some sort of punishment. You know, like it's just
And then at
constant.
4 p.m., he's like, I am the father of IVF.
Right. And also, what is IVF? And then, was it a Carrie Lake? She called it UVF,
Yes.
her whole debate. And I'm like,
UVF, UFO. I mean, the acronyms are so hard when you have no idea what they mean.
yeah. Okay, so we've got Comstock, we've got personhood,
Hmm.
we've got the data degradation.
Using vaccine anti-vax movements as a anti-abortion strategy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so all of that is happening.
Hmm.
We also simultaneously have a gag on all foreign funding that is supporting abortion outside of the US.
Hmm.
So we're exporting our own policies
Hmm.
outside.
And you're talking about the global gag rule, which we covered in a previous episode.
Yeah. All of that is going down.
Hmm.
And then, because everyone is getting normalized to all of these ridiculous things going on, they're going to bring in what I think they're going to call minimum national standards.
Hmm.
And they won't do this in year one, okay?
Mm-mm.
Because he saw how unpopular it was whenever he talked about a national ban. So he's going to wait and he's going to take us not from 0 to 100, but like 0 to 10 and then
Yeah,
10
you gotta pregame these things. Like
for
this is
sure.
all the things we just talked about is the foreplay to the national minimum standards, which is just it's a ban. That's a ban. If you see minimum national standards in terms of abortion, that is a national abortion ban.
Literally the only time that foreplay is a bad thing. Like, look at Republicans to just ruin something that's usually universally good, you know?
Damn it.
But yeah, so basically, I mean, we it's too early to tell what the minimum national standards proposed might be.
Hmm.
But like, I could very easily see them being like, okay, across the U.S., past a certain gestational age, this procedure just does not exist anymore.
Yeah.
I could also see them being like, the only situation in which it's okay is explicit situation number one, explicit situation number two, which, if you are getting rid of all of the infrastructure, all of the physicians, all of the medication that is required in order to do a procedure, what is your guarantee that there would even be access available, even if someone did meet the one criteria that you have listed, you know?
And even if you met the exception, as we've seen in states that have banned abortion, there won't be providers trained anymore in how to provide it. So even if you
Exactly.
met the exception, who is going to do it?
Yeah.
Because
And
there's now
that's,
whole cohorts of doctors that aren't being trained on how to provide
yeah.
abortions.
I mean, even to like today, right?
Mhm.
We are already seeing that in large regions of the country, for example, the South, medical schools are not providing training
Mhm.
to OBGYN residents.
Mhm.
So you already, even before any of what we have just talked about in this episode has been put into place, you already have huge regions of the country which are just abortion training deserts, right? So who people who are becoming doctors and are pro-choice and want to be able to use their skill set to provide human rights-based services to women
Mhm.
are having to take on physical cost of going to the few places in the US where they can even access training, and that's assuming that they are able to get into those places, that they are able to afford it, that they're able to stay, and that those services even continue to exist in the first place. So even before any of this has even happened,
Mhm.
there are so many states that are on the verge of experiencing major shortages of trained providers
Mhm.
that once you start to put into place barrier numbers 1, 2 through 100,
Mhm.
there's nothing to say that that will even exist at all in any form or fashion.
Looking ahead, I don't mean to scare people, but I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And we need to mentally prepare ourselves for living through very dark times in order to come out better on the other side. And I do think we will, because I think at some point, women and hopefully Americans at large will eventually just get absolutely fed the fuck up and riot over this. It surprises me that we haven't hit that point yet a little bit. I don't think it's gotten bad enough. I don't think enough women have died, which is a horrible thing to say.
Well, the worst part is, though, even though we know that more women are about to die than ever before, we're not going to hear about them because everything
Well,
is being suspended,
I
right?
agree. I think that's partially what, if people who are listening want to know, well, what do I do in the next 4 years? Like you're telling me all this really dark shit. Like, what do I do with all of this? If we go into the next 4 years knowing that data is going to be hidden, that these stories aren't going to be reported on, yes, you can only be responsible for what's within your small purview. But we all have a responsibility to be investigators, and we all have a responsibility to sleuth out what is actually happening. For example, if you see a small story in your local newspaper around someone who passed away, a pregnant woman from unexplained causes, ask why. And go ask your public health department if they're collecting data on that. We all have a responsibility to be part of the solution here and to track cases like this over the next 4 years. You don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be a public health professional. You just have to ask why.
Yeah. And I think you could also, if you see a story that someone else is sharing, amplify it. Set yourself up for being in an information landscape where you are still getting the tidbits of
Hmm.
information that do exist. And also set yourself up for success by like making those doctor's appointments now,
Hmm.
going and getting your birth control prescription refilled, getting abortion pills. They have a shelf life of 2 years. Make those pap smear screenings, those cervical cancer screenings, all of those appointments, get that done. Like,
Hmm.
set yourself up for success, girl, because the more able that you are, the more present you'll be in this fight.
Hmm. The fight for abortion rights isn't happening overnight. It's a slow, calculated dismantling of our freedoms. But understanding their strategy is the first step to stopping it. We can't afford to look away, and we won't. Stay informed, stay engaged, and let's make sure this rollback doesn't go unanswered.